Today we're in Psalm chapter 26. Psalm chapter 26. It's an interesting psalm, and I like to begin really at the end of the psalm because I think that it can be helpful to us and both challenging. In verse number 12, it's a very short psalm. He says, "My foot standeth," in the King James, "an even place." He's not talking about a smooth place, but a level place. And that's important because he's able to stand. The contrast, of course, would be one who is on unlevel ground. You might think of a hillside or something like that, which causes a person to stumble or fall. His point is that he is stable. He's standing on the rocks, so to speak, and because of that, he has stability in life. That's so very important for us to have stability and security in life. And in the psalm, of course, David is praying to God, and that's one of the great lessons we're learning in the Psalms is that we can turn to God in any circumstance or difficulty in life. What's interesting, though, what I want to emphasize here is that when he turns to God, I want you to think about for just a moment that when you pray to God, God actually listens. In other words, he is listening to what you say, because so oftentimes in relationships and people we talk to, you know that their mind is not there. You may be talking to someone in conversation, but they're not actually listening to you. I want just to emphasize that for just a moment. When you go to the throne of grace, that God actually hears what you're saying and is paying attention to what you are talking about. And so here again, we're looking at Psalm chapter 26. And of course, David is facing some troubles. There's always trouble in life. And David faced so much tribulation in life. And you see in the Psalms, oftentimes these petitions. In this circumstance, and we don't know what the setting is exactly, but what's going on is that David is being falsely accused. And just let me hesitate for just a moment. To be falsely accused brings a whole bunch of trouble. Your reputation can be ruined in just a few moments. You may be dismissed from your job or your career, or if you're in a court setting, it could even end up in prison or death. So false accusations, they're lying and they're slandering against David. And if you notice, he's going to ask God to do certain things, and also he's going to give evidence that he's innocent. It's really a great thing when you can go to God when you're innocent. But what's verse number 1? In the King James, it says, "Judge me." What it really says is to vindicate me. I want you to think about this for just a moment. When somebody is lying about you and slandering you and saying all kind of things that are abusive about you, can you just go to God in prayer alone and leave it with him? Think about this, that you're going to let God vindicate your righteousness or your innocence. How about that? I mean, instead of someone, a friend or a buddy or someone else trying to vindicate your righteousness, think about having God vindicate your righteousness. That will go a whole lot further. But here's what he says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity." See, that's his innocence. Of course, the word integrity means wholeness. Now, we like to talk about being compartmentalized. You know, if you disintegrate something, it's in pieces. And so we talk about balance in life and compartmentalizing our life, religion or finance or family or so on. But the Bible doesn't look at it like that. What he's really saying is, in my whole life, no matter where I am, what I'm doing, I have lived in integrity. What you see is what you get. And so that's a wholesome thing, you see, to live in integrity. Now, what he says then is, I have walked in my integrity. And by the way, as I was just looking at this, it's interesting to me how much personal testimony David is giving. If I were to break this down and had more time to exegete this, what you're getting is a view of David's public life and also his private life. And his private life often was dominated by prayer. I mean, in the secret closets of his life, it had to do with prayer to God. And so you're seeing that in the psalm, and you'll see it in a few verses later. But again, he's appealing to God to vindicate him, and also talking about he has walked in integrity. In other words, one day he's not a hypocrite, and another day he's a saint, and one day, he's an evildoer, and so on. I mean, he's walked in wholeness of life. There's integrity there, and oh, was that greatly needed today. And so he says, I've walked in integrity. Notice again, one of the things that you'll see in David's prayer life is this element of trust. I mean, what a wonderful thing. It's not just believing in God, but he trusts and had confidence in God. Not only that God would answer prayer, but he trusted in God himself. Now notice, I have walked in integrity. I've also trusted in the Lord. And can I encourage you to do that? That God is trustworthy. He'll keep his word. It's an amazing thing, because you can go to people you can't always trust. Now notice there, and I have to move a little quickly here, because he trusts in God, he will not slide or be swept away with the other sinners. And so he'll stand. Remember, Paul had said in 1 Corinthians 15, oh, it's needed today. In verse 58, be steadfast and unmovable. The problem over at the church in Ephesians, all the brethren were like children, being tossed and fro by every wind of doctrine. They needed stability. Now notice verse number 3, examine me. Now I'll tell you one thing. It's one thing to be examined by God and to ask him to examine you, but I got to thinking, I'd rather be examined by God for truthfulness than be examined by some others. How about you? And so he says, examine me, O Lord, and prove me, my reins and my heart. Just examine my whole being, my heart, my mind, my soul. Then verse number 3. Now, I don't have time to do a lot of things here, but if you go through this, you're going to see a great number of times. For instance, I'll just backtrack for just a moment. If you go back to verse 1, I have trusted in you. In verse 3, I have walked in truth. Verse 4, I have not sat. First, I will, and then he goes into, I do not go in, I have not gone into with the deceitful people. And he'll say that, he keeps on saying that all the way through this particular song. I have, or I will, or I have done, or I will do now. So it's an interesting thing. Just mark it down as you're going through this particular psalm. Notice then in verse number 3, for thy loving kindness, that's a word that's hard to translate. It actually referred back to a covenant love, and sometimes that's why you see it translated steadfast love and not loving kindness. And the idea here that from God's point of view, and for what we ought to understand, that God's love toward us is not just a feeling, but it is a committed or covenant love. There's a commitment to that love. And boy, we could talk a lot about that, couldn't we? Now, then he goes on to give proof, you see, of his integrity and evidence of the life he has lived. That's why he says in verse number 3, I have walked in truth. Number 4, I have not sat. By the way, that idea of sitting had the idea of residence or permanent residence, or has a alien that would come into the country that he would take upon the characteristics and the culture of that particular country. And what he's saying here is, I have not participated in, I have not become, I have not taken residence with these. I have not associated with them as far as in participation of what they're doing. And so he says, I have not sat with empty, vain people. And neither do I go in with the King James dissemblers. Interesting translation is those people who have the idea of hiddenness. That's what the hypocrite does. He's just hiding his true self. He's acting one way in which he is not. And David is saying, I have not participated in with these wicked and evil people. And as he goes on into the next verse, verse number 5, notice how strong these words are. And I think that, well, I just won't get into it today, but notice how strong the words are. I have hated, I have abhorred, It's loathsome to me, the congregation of evil people, and I will not sit with the wicked, even though that's what everybody's doing. I'm not going to be swept away from them. I'm going to stand my ground. That's why we're talking about, as we started this thing about, I'm standing on a King James, a even or a level place. I'm not unstable. I don't go with the flow. I'm not going with the wind. I'm not, even though I may be surrounded by those kind of people, I don't care about peer group influence. I'm going to stand on the rock. I'm going to stand on level ground. I'm not going to fall or slip away just because everybody else is going in that direction. Boy, we need folks like that, don't we? Now notice verse 6. I wash my hands in innocency, so I will compass the altar. That had the idea of worship, as you compass or surrounded the altar where they would worship. And notice that he's worshiping with others there. Notice verse number 7. I will publish, this is public, isn't it, with the voice of thanksgiving. Boy, I tell you what, there's such a need for gratitude today, being thankful to God and in our prayers and in our worship. And here he's saying, of course, the altar would give you the idea of worship, wouldn't it? So he's there with praise of thanksgiving and joy. Notice verse number 8, I have loved the habitation of thy house. Now, he's not talking, of course, about the house, the literal house of God, but what he really loves is the Lord. He doesn't care how embellished the buildings are or how attractive they are. That's not what draws him to the tabernacle, or that's not what draws him to the house of God. It's not all of that stuff. And we could talk about a whole lot of stuff that draws people, but that's not the reason he comes. In fact, it's not even, it comes out of a pattern. You know, some folks will come just because it's a pattern of life. They just come because that's the way their habits have been, had taken a grip on them. But here he's gone to the house of Lord because of the Lord, to worship him with thanksgiving and praise. And boy, that verse alone today is worth the lesson, isn't it? To have that kind of attitude of a worship spirit, that we go out of thanksgiving and joy because of who God is, and you're attracted by the beauty of God. Oh, the building isn't that important, is it? It really isn't. Now, verse number 9, gather not my soul with the sinners. Oh, I wish we had time to talk about that. He had not gathered himself with the sinners in life, and he's asking God that he's praying to God. We need to pray this prayer, that you be not gathered with the sinners in death. I tell you what, not even the sinners want to be with the sinners in death, do they? I don't want to be on the side of the goats, Matthew 25. I want to be with the sheep. So he's praying to God, gather me not with, I don't want to end up like those kind of people. And that's how they do end up. Gather not my soul with the sinners, nor my life with these bloody men. Now notice verse 10, in whose hand is schemes and mischief, planning to do evil. I marvel sometimes how there are so many people in the world today that all they spend their time is with evil schemes to rip people off, to do evil, to do all kinds of things that they shouldn't do. It's amazing how this is going on so much in the world today. And so he's talking about, remember, he talked about he hated those congregation of evildoers. It's the wrong thing. There's no delight in it. Sometimes we take, well, I better not go there. All right, now verse number 11. But I will walk in my integrity. Notice that again. Do you see it? Walk in integrity. I mean, in wholeness of life. You are who you are on the outside, on the inside. There's no hiddenness in you. It doesn't matter where you're walking, what street you're going down, what place you're in, no matter what crowd you're with. You know, some folks are different when they're with a different crowd. Did you know that? Now watch. But I will walk in my integrity. And notice here again, David never claimed to be sinless, but his pattern of life was godly. And that's why even as a godly man and a righteous man, he knows that at times he's stumbled and fall. And so that's why he's asking in verse number 11, at the same time, redeem me and be merciful. You see, you can be a man of God and a godly man, but let's face it, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that's why we need his grace and mercy. And God is a God of mercy. Now think about going to prayer in this kind of a prayer. Going to God because you trust him, knowing that God will actually listen to you. Go in a spirit of humility, pray, asking God for help, asking God to deliver you, asking God to judge you, and say, God, I haven't lived like that, and God, don't let me die with the wicked. Be merciful and redeem me. What a powerful, powerful prayer. And I think that it's just been a tremendous journey in the Psalms as we're really learning how to pray. No wonder, you see, as you read the Psalms and you're seeing a lot of the private life of David, you know, when you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, you can see some real problems with David at times. But I want you to understand, you're really seeing the man here. It's no wonder why David is called a man after God's own heart, a man that loved the Lord, and a man that trusted him, and a man that always depended on him, and a man that always wanted to give God all the glory. What a tremendous psalm. I mean, I hope that you're reading these and they'll help you in your prayer life as we draw closer and closer to the Lord. And so I'll be seeing you tonight. We're going to be looking at Psalm chapter 27, and then tomorrow we'll be looking, of course, in the Psalm chapter 28. See you then.